Baie dankie, dis baie lekker om terug te wees in Bloemfontein. But I guess I'll do this in English. Thank you, Henry. I will not be talking about university design, but actually about public space in general, public space that are located in, as you can see from the slides, in townships and in the inner cities of specifically Johannesburg and Cape Town. My work takes on the form of more post-occupancy evaluation. So I'm very interested in how spaces are produced through design and also how spaces realize in practice. Very much this starting point in what Henry just introduced us to in terms of a taxi rank. And by the way, let me just introduce my colleague here, Holger Deppie, is one of my colleagues at WITS, and I asked him to also participate in this study. I apologize to my students that need to hear this talk another time. I've also pulled my students into this project, and they are actually helping me document a lot of these public spaces around Johannesburg. So I'm very thankful for that. The case studies that I'll be presenting to you today, I do with a lot of respect to colleagues in the field that do work, exceptional work, but in a very difficult field. These are pioneering examples of public space making. What I'm suggesting to you is that we look at these spaces and that we apply acute observation to learn from them in how we can make public spaces work in the South African context. I'm presenting to you also today research that is still in progress, not research that I have a final results or the outcome of research, but it's really research in progress. And as I said, my students are also documenting of some of these spaces in Johannesburg. And it's research that is based on preliminary observations of public spaces in both Cape Town and Johannesburg. We are primarily interested in how spaces are produced, in other words, the production of space, how spaces are constructed, and how people use, or the use value of spaces that follow from the delivery of public spaces within an embedded community of users. What initiated this research was a series of site visits to most significant public spaces that, in a sense, define the contours of post-apartheid democracy. These attempts at making spaces follow from years of negotiations between architects, urban designers, and various cities and regional agencies. And this is the kind of dialogue that I'm talking about. The notion of the production of space, the construction of space, and the use value of space are all co-opted from the social theorist Henry Lefebvre's idea of how space is reproduced in society. Only by considering all these dimensions, production, construction, and use value, are we able to develop a picture of where public space making is going in the South African context. This is why we are proposing a set of questions that might involve many stakeholders, architects, urban designers, city officials, and also the users of space, to understand how we can make public spaces resilient for many generations to come. We are trying to challenge space making to go beyond the physical delivery of an urban design project, and instead understand a number of points that are all enmeshed in this slide. One, in terms of construction, how projects are conceived by designers and how their interactions with the brief, budgets, budgetary constraints, participatory processes, and their vision of the ongoing longevity of space. How do these things realize? In terms of production, how are these spaces realized and communicated to a community of professionals such as yourself through the media and publication sources? And in terms of the use value, how do people actually experience these spaces on the ground through everyday use, appropriation, opportunity creation, and sometimes even resistance. First, we consider programs in both these cities that have been significant in pushing the agenda towards public space making in formerly disadvantaged areas of the city. These include the inner city of Johannesburg and also the township spaces of Johannesburg and Cape Town. We are hoping to make closer contact with these agencies and actually interview them to understand some of these dialogues. Our starting point deals with the visionary ideas that designers propose for public space in the context of South Africa, where the notion of publicness and public space actually seems somewhat of an oxymoron. Our reality rather suggests that what is delivered as shared space for the public sometimes actually becomes reappropriated. That parts of public spaces are actually carried away, physically carried away by the public into the private realms of homes and self-constructed houses. The other notion that comes into play is the fact that public space is not static and do not reach its fullness upon delivery, but rather become a public space over time through people's ongoing engagement and stewardship with that space. Instead, we should see these media images almost as frameworks for life, to still take hold of it. If we're not careful, we run the risk of seeing these images as the end-all of public spaces. But this is not all that public space has to offer. These are some of the books by Dekla Graupner Rasmus, the images from those books, and here are some other very important books that communicate both architecture and urban design. Architecture of the Third Landscape here, Architecture in the Free State. We already have a rich tradition of public space making that builds on ideas of minimalism, this coming from the Cape School, and through media representations lose sight of the fact that these idealized photographic images of completed projects actually show an incomplete view in the life cycle of spaces. The true test of a space come in with the daily occupation, use, and adaptation of that space, as we can see here in the Baragwana taxi transport interchange. The question that is raised then is rather, how do designers involve communities and users in the process of placemaking and ensure that ongoing involvement by these stakeholders are ensured? These dynamics prove to be rather difficult, as demonstrated through a community participatory design project in Slovo Park, where community members even helped in the physical construction of the site. When neighboring residents are asked about the purpose of this public space, though, the response is somewhat apathetic. That it is for the community, they say. As if we are somehow able to distance ourselves from this notion of community and be mere observers of the spectacle of the representation of community life. Creating community through public space making becomes even more problematic when we think that community participation can be reduced to a group of locals spending endless hours doing mosaics of vernacular motifs. Not with specific reference to the project on the slide. These brittle messages so quickly become erased by constant use and flow of people. Instead, are we not searching for a robustness of space that do not valorize nostalgic notions of community participation, but instead provide an active backdrop for life to introduce its own detailing and motifs? Something as simple as this not well designed, but this steel bench that the individual can sort of get himself to sit on is the kind of robustness that I'm speaking of. Or one of these concrete slabs that actually attract a lot of life from both teenagers and youngsters. We are also interested in how design spaces provide a range of amenities, activity spaces, and behavioral settings, where the flexibility of space allow not only for the programmed, as we see in this very good example of public space making in Cape Town, but also for the unprogrammed, the unexpected, the serendipitous, here demonstrated by 3 kids playing with found objects adjacent to this programmed soccer field in this project by VPUU in Cape Town. Or the Deep Kloof Extreme Park, where everyday amenities demonstrate the urgency of the need for quality public spaces in an overtly privatized society. These public spaces, owned and maintained by City Parks of Johannesburg, are spillover spaces for the already active streets adjacent to this space. In itself, these spaces are attracting a range of informal businesses and establishments on its periphery. Even watching an international selection of satellite channels become part of what communities do as the shared. And here's an image from William White's 1980s Social Life of Small Open Spaces, where the men stand in line watching the girls go by. We see the same phenomena here in Philippi, public transport interchange in Cape Town. Good public spaces do not overlook the simple conditions such as this. Men sitting crammed in on a bench, watching local talent parading from the train station. We would also like to understand why things like vandalism and reappropriation is so much part of public spaces. Is it because people do not buy into the semiotics of mosaics? Or is it more fundamental and simple, such as William White suggested, that something as simple as the height of a bench can just be too high to comfortably sit? Is this perhaps why alternative arrangements for seatings are common? Just right of the benches I just showed you, you see this couch that was brought in under the shade of the tree, protected from the rush of traffic. Community resistance can sometimes even take on extreme forms by actively removing pieces of wall to restore the connections to parts of the community that become disconnected as a result of the public space project. In some cases, kids can even play rough and try to see what's on the other side of the wall. Or sometimes vandalism can be something much more innocent, a form of self-expression, engaging with architecture that allow for this. We also cannot consider public space making without catering to the generative patterns of informal trading, such as we can see here. Highly active trading space in Walter Sisulu Square in Johannesburg. People's livelihoods depend on the effective arrangement of space and the opportunistic nature of the physical. Formalized structures, such as rent control, may be detrimental. This is the actual space designed for trading in the interior of the building. These factors are often hard to predict for architects and urban designers, and outside of what designers can often anticipate. Our understanding of how trading actually operates on the ground may come from a more in-depth observation of real-life conditions, such as these settings that need no more than the shade of trees in a highly pedestrianized areas. What is actually interesting here is, if I can refer to zone 3 and 4, you can see the crosses, which is a sort of symbolic gesture to voting in the new South Africa. and those were actually designed as trading spaces. But in reality, as you can see, they're not used for trading spaces, or just the informal conversation every now and then. But as the students observed in this public space, the texture on the public space is actually very hard to walk on, very difficult to walk on. And people actually just prefer to throw out blankets and put their goods on blankets. Other examples, in a more positive sense, such as Piet Louw's pay points in Cape Town, provide an unexpected opportunity for display and exchange, as we can see here. We've also identified security and surveillance as a critical condition to public spaces. The mere visibility of a security guard may, in fact, provide that sense of safety. More subtly, cues coming from what we can say a Foucauldian scenario of panopticism, where observation points behind one directional glass can actually achieve the same goal. You don't even need a security guard within that space to feel secure. Or perhaps even more passive forms of surveillance, such as, again, the BPUU project, where these observation points, observation towers, give a sense of safety because of the visibility from the building. Or more informally even, spaza shops on the edges of this public space that provide constant eyes in the space. So how do we make sure that these idealized images of the shared, such as the Langa Youth Center, remain in the hands of the shared and do not suffer the fate of private interest? Here we can see the project published in Architecture SA, and this is what it actually looks like today. Or similarly, Piet Louw's bathhouse in Yanga. I couldn't actually give you an after photo, but that was the location where the bathhouse was located in Cape Town. Maybe the answer lies in Drill Hall in Johannesburg. A self-proclaimed philanthropist and green artist negotiated for himself a place to stay while acting as a full-time custodian of this space. Similarly, the city park's employee ensured that the park users are at their best behavior. The kids cannot dare run through the water without being reprimanded. "You are making muddy patches," he said. In conclusion, we are interested in understanding not only how public spaces become a reality, but how we can learn from the constant flows of life that make these spaces truly public. Thank you.